Good evening, and we are happy to host in the studio our colleagues from Poland, Germany and the US who are currently visiting Ukraine and discovering what's going on 5 years after the Maidan Revolution and not just. And we have the topic to discuss together. It's about the common ground or different interests. Are Poland and Germany still Ukraine's international partners? But we discuss a variety of the things, and I'm happy to introduce Agnieszka Lichnerowicz from Polish Tok FM, as well Michał Karnowski from Polish weekly magazine Sieci, and our colleague Paul Hockenos, who is an American writer and currently writing also for foreign policy, and Natascha Freundel, who is a German journalist from the NDR and radio editor there. So welcome. And to start the discussion, from my position of the Ukrainian journalist, I probably would have a rather general intro that, today everywhere, not just in Ukraine, but in the US, in Germany, in Poland, we are speaking about the decay of, let's say, liberal values and the discussion in the public sphere. Though the reasons, and also the fact that a lot of people we didn't expect, they're voting for the forces which are promoting more authoritarian rule. Which is kind of normal in all the countries we mentioned. But the reasons for that are very different. For instance, in Ukraine, you can explain that people would like to have more security because the war is going on, the war with Russia. In Poland, you have a different thing. There was a democratic change of the government with a political party which undermining some of the institutions. In the US, we know what we have in the US. We have Donald Trump, but as well, like you can have a variety of issues from migration. And in Germany, for instance, there was a case of the refugee crisis, as people say, and a lot of people would say, Germany couldn't find the way to welcome all those people. But we know that in the elections, the far-right parties are coming to the scene. So the reasons are very different in each country, but somehow we feel that there is something going on. How we would explain that?
Yeah, maybe at first I'm sorry, I don't want to destroy your program, but I have to oppose to the statement that that we have that we are in the process of undermining democracy in Poland, because I think that this huge change 2015 was fully democratic. And of course, we have a huge political struggle, but this picture is not real. I would say Poles wanted to change the course of the country, and it happened. And of course, it is described by liberal or leftist media as a process of undermining democracy. But in my opinion, this is not true.
Okay, would you share that as another poll?
We can stage for you the internal discussion we are having in Poland.
It was told, yeah.
Obviously, they were democratic elections, but as Michał said, obviously there's as in many nations, there's an internal conflict. I think we can say that. So you can't say Poles did that. Part of the society chose that government. Part of the society is strongly against it for the reasons more or less you mentioned. The reasons for this political turmoils or changes, whatever you call them, we are having, more or less in many countries they are similar with their national or regional specifics. So more or less in this globalized world we can see the reasons why people fear that there is no future for democracy to survive. People need to have hope and believe that the system will help them to have better future for them and for their children. And with our own local Polish reasons, I guess, they would go long time in history, we've been having these discussions about our identity, about our independence for tens or hundreds of years, especially with this huge transformation in 1889, which on one hand you can say was spectacular, it was peaceful, but of course there are many wounds and there are many businesses that were not settled.
Just one sentence from our perspective. The main question is the liberal, are the liberal parties, leftist parties, the only power who has the right to win the election? Because this is the same discussion in Poland like in US, in my opinion.
So it's time to move to the US.
I left the US in 1985. One of the reasons that I felt that the United States had already, I sensed illiberal and right-wing arch-conservative currents that existed then. Since then, they've been pushed ever more to the right, basically by the Republican Party, which has become more and more radical. And I mean, in my day, when I can still remember Richard Nixon being the boogeyman of the left and liberals. I mean, today he would practically fit in the Democratic Party. We never thought any president would come to power more right-wing than Ronald Reagan. Then comes George Bush II, and now Donald Trump. So I mean, we've seen things just kind of moving, swiftly and vastly to the right, and I think it's been pushed by the Republican Party. At the same time, there's a real lack of imagination inside of the Democratic Party. I mean, you saw that in particular with the Clintons. I see now democracy in the United States kind of being reinvigorated by people like Bernie Sanders and some of the new women and other people who have come into the Congress in the most recent election. So I see some hope there. I think that the Trump phenomenon is an aberration. I don't think he represents the United States. He represents a very small portion of mostly white, mostly male Americans who have had an inordinate say because of the way that the electoral system is set up and because of gerrymandering and other inadequacies in the system. I certainly hope that's going to be corrected. In Europe, I mean, we are seeing a drift to the right. We are seeing an embrace of liberal values and a type of conservatism in Poland, for example, and in Hungary and elsewhere, which I feel is very different from the kind of conservatism that came to be in West Germany and Germany. And I think that it deviates from some of the fundamental values of the European Union, which in part I think the European Union is also responsible for, because its lack of imagination, its structural weaknesses. And so I think really in Europe, I think one of the key is to get the European Union back on its feet and for it to be able to offer a future with hope and a narrative that had sustained it since the 1950s, the peace and prosperity, which now people don't believe in.
Before we discuss the narrative, so what is the German saying then?
I have to say that you were asking for explanations about the new rise of neo-right-wing positions, politicians, movements. And if I had the answer, I could sit here very relaxed, and I'm not. But I have to agree to things that Agnieszka said about a perspective for the future that is perhaps lacking, as also Paul said, lacking in the liberal European, pro-European parties inside and outside Germany. I agree to that, and I also think that perhaps in the last 20-25 years, since the downfall of the wall of the Soviet bloc, there hasn't been enough attention paid to the stories of those people who lived and who were impregnated by socialist lifestyle ideas. That their stories really haven't been told. In a broader sense, we are still not aware of the changes that happened 89, 90. I wouldn't say that that liberalism is really threatened big time. I think it's just we face a new polarization which has international and national reasons, and you see a rise of pro-European movements, especially in Germany as well, but also outside. You know, there are, and elections show, and especially the latest elections within Germany show that, for instance, the Green Party gained a lot of votes. So it's not just the so-called alternative for Germany that is gaining.
In our discussion, you mentioned, of course, German politics. You mentioned Republicans and what's probably Democrats are doing or not doing, or something which is happening inside the Poland. But still, like we see some of the, let's say, not similarities, but the trend in particular. Probably we hear, I think, easier for our audience to explain it, not really exactly that right wing or left wing, but really say there are some authoritarian move. You know, like people are ready to have kind of the stronger power. But and we said that, so what is this vision? It just feels that everybody lacks a vision for the future, apart from the, you know, authoritarian people or the nationalists. What it could be? Is it really, you mentioned Greens coming to the scene, but still what else? Because we're a bit tired also to discuss what's going wrong.
I think that it's a big change going on with globalization and geopolitical reshaping of things, technology. But also I think that somehow the socio-political models we had in the States are now somehow need some renewal. First, because globalization is a challenge for the systems. I mean, you can't democratically control these financial processes that easy anymore. And we also see, especially in the West, you can discuss it, how is it in Poland, that you see economical polarization. I would also first especially look for answers in our own countries. So what are the needs and dreams of people to somehow look for solutions that may bring the future back. But I also believe in European project as such. So I think also the work there needs to be done, both in our national states and over there. And I would look for the European Union that would maybe concentrate more on people and their social needs. It was very much concentrated on economics, somehow believing that if you integrate economically, you would also bring other integrations. And we see in Eurozone that it's not fully working, that this famous banking rescue took place. There's no one vision. There's no one answer with new ideology, new ism, whatever it is, that will bring the future back.
Michał, do you believe in the European project?
Of course.
I'm
keeping my fingers crossed for Europe. But of course, as far as I understand, you ask about my dream. My dream is that Europe should come back to the fathers of the Europe ideas, and I see the EU as a federation of free independent countries, not an artificial organism which goals is to change people, to re-educate them. It's horrible, in my opinion.
What exactly is horrible?
That so often Europeans feel as a pupils at European school being taught by clerks, by officials which weren't elected to any organism, to any administration, to any parliament, and this is the reason why so many people feel that this Europe is not for them.
Natascha, do you feel as a pupil taught?
No, Germans are teachers at this
school. So do you feel either as a pupil
as well?
Okay,
I was waiting for that sentence by Michał, because this is the logic, this is the narrative.
Okay.
I would agree in the fact that the structures in European Union elections are not as transparent as they should be. I do agree with what Paul said, that there had been mistakes, that the European Union as a political structure and a democratic structure has to be developed, but I think it should be stronger. It should be stronger in a democratic sense, with democratic rules of votes.
You have currently the president, the US president, who is really critical of the European Union as a whole. Donald Trump really doesn't like it. No. How it comes to the whole discussion? He really, I think, I've been to the Donald Trump visit to Poland. That was his first visit, where really there was this union between the government and Donald Trump. Pretty impressive, yeah.
I mean, in general, Americans don't understand the European Union. And it's really anathema to them to think of sharing sovereignty and power in the way that the European Union does. I even think that President Obama it took him about 8 years to finally give his famous speech in Athens, where he said that he thought the European Union was the pinnacle of the development of democracy in the West. But I mean, I agree with the colleagues that I think that as for the causes, you have the erosion of the social welfare state, and in Europe and in the United States, which never had it, you have a greater discrepancy between rich and poor. It's been growing and growing and growing. Even in Germany, although you've had the Social Democrats in the power since 1998, there has to be a kind of a relaunching of the European Union. It has to be more democratic. It has to be more transparent. I think Germany is playing these days, in contrast to the past, when Helmut Kohl and when West Germany was the motor, kind of a selfless motor of the European Union. It's changed with Gerhard Schröder as Chancellor and then with Merkel to a much more Germany first, Germany-oriented, what's best for Germany. Merkel, I felt, never really had a vision or a good understanding of how important that the European Union was and is for Germany. And I would go back to what Natascha said also. I mean, the Greens are extraordinarily impressive in Germany right now, and they do have a vision that looks ahead and answers some of the questions of how our societies are going to change with climate change. And it's the party that launched the Energiewende in Germany, the clean energy transition, which is changing Germany in very many ways.
And kind of noting when Paul was speaking about Merkel putting Germany first as a Poles, what you would say on that?
I mean, we have been having that discussion inside, and it's also a topic we disagree. But I think that there are two issues that are to be debated, and people may have different opinions on that. One is the issue of sovereignty. What is a contemporary sovereignty? Are individuals, let's say in Poland, and society, nation of Poland as such, stronger if we decide to be sovereign in this classical way, so independent from any institutions, or more or less, I'm making it. Or if you look, what are the challenges for people in the state contemporary, global threats to really freedoms of people, economical freedoms of their prosperity. If you look at this global corporate interest, global imperial interest of some global countries, whether we as people and as nation and a state are stronger within stronger European structures. And second issue is, which we also have in Poland, and it's very black and white discussion, whether it's really selfless, whether Germany was ever really selfless, and whether it's only egoism. And I think that in Poland, what we have, many people believe that European Union is only egoistic Czech game, where all the nations are egoistically looking only over their own businesses, but only pretending to have this common European interest.
We shouldn't focus only on European Union as an institution. We should discuss the democracy as well. So have a look at the whole picture. We have Germany, which are perfect pupil in this European school. But what about Hungary? Bad pupil. What about Italy? Not bad. Yeah, not good. Poland, the worst pupil. Yes. So
you have the UK.
So UK, leave the Europe. So my question is it perfect machine? Is it work so well as you describe? What was wrong? Who made this mistake? And these nations are patronized as voting for bad solution, for bad parties. And in my opinion, the EU leaders should consider this, that so many countries, so many groups have huge problem with union, have the impression that it doesn't work. So they are wrong. You know, it's, we can't just punish people. We can't just patronize them.
I think on the one hand, the European Union does have a lot of problems, and they have to be addressed, and there have to be, input from everybody, and including, conservatives from Poland and other countries as well. I don't think that the right wing and the arch conservative forces are the only ones, and I think that the European Union, it is a collection of democracies, and there are democratic standards, and Poland and Hungary, they have been violating them, and they've been breaching the independence of the judiciary and the media.
You have no one proof that democracy was violated in Poland. We had an election, I'm sorry for interrupting, but we had an election, a local election, and in big cities, the opposition took power, took offices, took the presidents of the cities. And is it democracy or not? Does it work or not?
There is an alternative version or vision for the EU by many right-wing and arch-conservative forces of a Europe of nations. And I think this is exactly the wrong way. This is what we've learned from the past, that a Europe of nations, a collection of nations, is not what Europe's all about. That Europe is a civic structure, and that it's based on the rights of citizens and not on the rights of nations. And this is where a whole idea of human rights comes from, and division of powers, etc.
You were saying, like, the situation is bad. I'm not sure of that. The situation on social levels, I agree to that totally. But for me, the European Union is a project of peace. And I think in respect to that, and you were speaking about the founding fathers of the European Union, that was exactly the idea of the European Union. To find to unite the enemies nations, the enemies nations that were, most of their times, they were at war. And suddenly we have a long period of peace that I'm very grateful for. I never experienced a wartime. I'm very, very grateful, contrary to this country, by the way, that we're in now.
And that's where I would like to jump in with also the question. No, in particular the question, because Ukraine also had never, and I think that shouldn't be also the any kind of idea that Ukraine never experienced the war, a conflict before 2014 as well. It's not the society used to the conflict. And my question would be different, that you all mentioned that, the problems with the welfare state, other things. I've been to the US and seen extreme poverty to the extent I haven't seen it. I speak about the homeless people, about not access to the healthcare, all other things. However, when we speak about for instance, migration and refugee crisis, as it's named, Ukraine is a country at war with a foreign aggression where we had up to 1.5 or even 2 million internally displaced, moved from one region to another, moved because of the war in the very kind of urgent way. And Ukraine is definitely a poor state, one of the poorest in Europe, uncomparable to Poland, Germany, the US. However, we kind of digested our internal displaced. There is no major crisis. They, in fact, didn't go out of Ukraine, like a few, maybe thousands, but very few people went to Poland. However, when we come to, for instance, I remember in Poland, I've been in the day where there were demos against refugees and the refugees were not there. I've been remembering being in Germany when there was like the first discussion about the refugee crisis, in particular those coming from Syria. And you think like, that's a crisis, country can't do that. But you feel like, why can't? And especially when people speaking about migrants in the US, you say like, sorry, you have rich countries, you have, and so it's all doable. I think that sometimes also the Europeans and the Americans are in the panic mode when they shouldn't be in the panic mode, because worse things are doable in the cases with way worse economic situation like Ukraine. So maybe I would be very curious to hear your reaction like that, that sometimes it's for us who hard to understand. I understand the threats, but why Europeans and Americans are mourning when there is no real reason to do that and you are capable to sort out the issues?
This brings us right back to your first question, which is these rise of illiberal, often racist political parties and forces. I mean, there isn't really a migration. At the moment, there's not a migration crisis in Germany, Europe. There are very few number of refugees coming in. And even at the height of the so-called refugee crisis of 2015, 1.2 million refugees in 1 year in the European Union of 520 million people is a very small number. Germany was ill-prepared for it, and that was true. But I mean, we're also talking about, fundamental right here, the right of political asylum for politically prosecuted people. We can't forget that either. And I mean, the big mistake that was made in Europe, I live in Germany, it was made by Merkel. She was right to say that not to put up a border. There hasn't been a border between Austria and Germany for years, so it wasn't like she was welcoming or opening any borders. The borders were open. She didn't put up a border and put troops on them to stop them. What she did was right. It was one of the greatest things that I think modern Germany's done. I was incredibly proud of Merkel for doing this, but I've been disappointed with her since then for backtracking on it, for taking and using the language of the far right, of the AfD, and by embracing that, she has strengthened the right-wing parties, and I see that across Europe.
Natascha?
I don't think she was actually putting up the language of the AfD. I wouldn't agree to that, but I'm sure that the so-called crisis wasn't mediated well enough and that there wasn't enough discussion about the consequences. I mean, I think that the central and left-wing parties still have to learn how to discuss problems that are there. It's a migration from a different culture in many aspects that we have to see the full picture. Who is coming? So there are also problems with a lot of people coming in. But to paint the picture black and white is always problematic. To paint the picture as a wave, the narratives, the concepts that the whole movements were described in are very problematic. Like a wave of people coming in, as if Germany is drowning under a wave of migration. This, of course, is stupid.
I just will also mention, I think we are discussing, if we speak about Germany, for instance, there are refugees coming from the Muslim culture that is a totally new, and this multiculturalism is really a difficult thing. However, we would remember that, for instance, in the US, most of the migrants, not refugees, but also refugees, they are coming from Latin America, Catholics, not really. So you have the same issue, but in different countries. But coming back to Poland, so there are almost 1 million Ukrainians, but they are not refugees. As once one of the Polish politicians mentioned, they are students, they are working. I mean, it's different. These are not the people who escaped from the war in Ukraine. People who left the Donbas, they are mainly moved to the territories nearby, and they are mainly moved from the to capital or to other areas like Kharkiv. But my still question would be, as a Ukrainian, to Polish journalists, we would always disagree that there are always issues, social issues. That things could be more. There are people from Poland moving to Ireland, everything. However, if you look to the level of life, sometimes probably Ukrainians would say, why they are complaining that things are so wrong?
True. In Poles' perspective, the level of their life is quite good. But of course, people are always looking for a better life. It's obvious. Yes, if you earn 2,000 zlotys in Poland, which is $100, and you have a chance to earn twice more in Britain on free or even more, you usually take this chance. But this is worth emphasizing. But we have even more, because the research. There are research that we have 2 million Ukrainians in Poland, and there is any bad things and quarrel and argue. They are inside us, inside our society, and it works very well. So why the Muslims migration is seeing in different way?
But there is no much, as I understand, in Poland.
No, but. Okay.
What I wanted to say, first, I really respect your society and country for being able to take care of the IDPs. And I think we have to remember that in Bangladesh, which is a really poor country, they have about 800,000 people coming from Myanmar in recent months. If you look into Uganda, which is also not a rich country, they managed to also take care of hundreds of thousands of people. So I think migration, especially if it comes in a group, is always a challenge. And they are really, I agree, pragmatic questions that you have to answer and be prepared, and especially take care of the people that are weakest and poorest in your society, because they sometimes are really their interest and are threatened. But I think the discussion about the migration is also a discussion about us, actually. So somehow some questions were raised when people started coming. And unfortunately, in Poland, we could talk for hours why there was such a change in polls and people's support for the refugees. If you look into the polls, a couple of years ago, between 2015, Poles were not so threatened and against people coming in Poland. You could look for answers for insecurity. You could look for answers if you look about our identity discussions. But there was also, unfortunately, political interest. The elections came at that time, and they were really hot, and the competition was really strong. And unfortunately, this issue also became a political issue, just a political instrument and a question. And all that, because we hardly have any experience of migration, especially from Muslim countries, what we know especially from media. This is media responsibility also. So how do people shape their point of views? What do people think about it? Many people have not had personal experience with that. Everything they understand about it and they know is because they learn about it from media, from politicians, from their friends in other countries.
My question would be on the media. We are all journalists here, and there is a general trend, and a lot of journalists even accept that it's not a question whether they are right or wrong, about this idea of the liberal media being elitist. But what I anyway feel, doesn't matter like how you label that, liberal, not liberal, that it's true that there is the less trust to the media. And we know the cases where German media were doing a great job and they were accused of kind of being too politically correct. Sometimes they probably didn't report something, so there are the reason for that. There is an issue also in Poland when that it feels today that they're very polarized, and there are a lot of people who feel that these media are portraying them in a wrong way. You have that in the US, but I'm also concerned that you shouldn't be teaching the people. You can't be arrogant, and sometimes it feels that the journalists are arrogant in the way that they are discussing the people, that those people don't understand us. They don't understand these values. So what we are, and even in Ukraine, we are the initiative, Hromadske, we come from the ground. We set up the station by the journalists. We were with the people. We are not like a rich station. We really very kind of humble and modest media operation. Still we feel when we speak about the issues of what's going on in Kiev, people feel alienated. My question is about the answers. What as a journalist we do with that? It's still new reality. What we do, our good job is not kind of, sometimes we don't do the good job, but sometimes the good job we are doing is criticized for being either arrogant or too elitist.
Well, I have to say that I totally agree to your description, and I have to say it is a complicated situation. Sometimes I wonder why we get the reactions that we get, on the streets. Reporters on the streets get attacked by demonstrators, etc. So this is something the mistrust towards public, especially the public radio and TV sphere in Germany is growing in a frightening way. The only thing that we can do is keep on going and being aware, of course, of the criticism, being aware of maybe a lack of consciousness towards the normal people, I would say, not the simple people, but the normal people. As I said, all the stories that haven't been told, especially in East Germany. It's like a balance between opening up with all the social media developments that we have and trying just to work better, to prove to the public that it's important to have a free media.
Your answers? Solutions?
I believe, I still believe that democracy and the way it plays different interests is the best solution, although sometimes it may be frustrating, although sometimes you feel threatened that democratic system might not be strong enough to protect itself from more authoritarian things. So I believe that we have to understand what mistakes we individuals or our media might have done and learn the lessons. And I agree, keep doing on what we are doing. This patronizing probably there was and still is among journalists and politicians, and especially in that times where we have more democracy, thanks to the social media. That's not a sin, as we say, but it's just a very grave mistake. And keep on doing the job we as journalists are doing, I mean, and try to, within the democratic system, do what we can do. Sometimes it's a frustrating process where you cover something and you have the impression that it doesn't change anything, that there are stronger forces in the society as far as propaganda is concerned, as far as political interest is concerned, as far as money is concerned, that you feel that doing your everyday job, you have no influence. But I think at the end it has to work like that, because otherwise there is no democracy.
Yeah, we are a group of journalists from different medias, different societies, and we are a real live proof that the discussion is possible. I think that generally the traditional media are undermined by social media. I have an impression that everybody wants to destroy traditional media from the social media. It doesn't matter from the left, from the right. This is the common goal. This is my impression, because everything it's not important what you put on the cover. You are always undermined. It's stupid, crazy. This is fake news. I think that we have to be with people. We have to remember that we are to serve the people. And the history of my company is very similar for you, I would say, because my company was established by the group of conservative journalists because we had the impression that we have something which is ours, yes, which can't be undermined, which can't be influenced by others, by money, by politicians, and it was successful. And I think this is a good way. And the first thing, the last thing, we have to remember in Europe as a journalist that we can't be a part of European institution. I have an impression that majority of official media, of this traditional media, have this feeling that they are a part of EU. They are responsible for this, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It won't be work.
But I have to say also that as journalists, there's this temptation. I mean, it's a big question in Poland as well. I mean, how much are you an independent journalist, and how much are you representing your
different media,
country or government? Yeah.
Well, the whole media landscape and what is media has changed so completely from when I decided to be a journalist, which was considered the golden days of journalism, when the reporters from the Washington Post and the New York Times could actually report on the wrongdoing of a president and bring him down. Nixon's infractions were, just a small, tiny fraction of the wrongdoings and the lies and the illegalities that happened during the Trump administration. But I think that it's the role of the media today looking ahead. And I think that I think the German media does a good job of looking at the way that the transition to renewable energy and climate change is changing society. It's going to change democracy in media and business models it already has, education, etc.
And we're here in Kiev, in Ukraine. We're really coming to these days, these months. We are remembering that it's already 5 years since the revolution in the Maidan, quite a lot of time. I should probably also say that our audience know very well that we are the media which could be very critical to the government and different political forces, and keep them accountable and don't search for excuses. While I'm curious, talking to the group of the European journalists, that I believe that there is some luck in Ukraine in the whole situation, that you don't feel this apathy in the society. Though Ukrainians speak about that, somehow you remember that, like, a lot of people said that all this crisis connected to Brexit, to the migration, to Trump, are also because a lot of people feel apathetic. They don't come to the elections. They don't politically participate. We can't complain about that.
Well,
Ukrainians are really,
as well.
but Ukrainians are really like into the politics. It's not like the parties are gone. People, vice versa, trying to be very active. They join the institutions. Of course, there is a level of disappointment. My general question would be more about your impression and your questions on what you've seen in Ukraine. In particular, I would mention that usually 5 years after every revolution, journalists are coming to say how it didn't happen properly. And I think, like, you have some of the experience also working on the, in the Balkans. You said, like, some things failed in the Balkans, though somehow they have peace. We should also remember that. So my also, and sometimes I hear there is a lot Russia does, like the Kremlin does, also to portray Ukraine as a failed state, which is, under the, which is in the conflict, the economy is collapsing. So what is your feeling about that? How do you see also the Ukraine in this discussion? Some of you have been reporting from Ukraine for the last years. Please.
First, I have to say that I think in Poland maybe especially, but I think many European countries, this apathy is really gone or in the process of being gone. I mean, the society in Poland is now really active. Sometimes we fear too active as far as conflict is concerned. But as far as Ukraine is concerned, I've been traveling here for many years now, and I've spent many weeks on Maidan. I've been in Crimea, and I've traveled a bit to Donbass. And I look at it. I'm interested in transformation as such. I've observed it in many countries, and I look at it as a process. I liked it's a journalistic saying. I mean, it's oversimplification, but I like the saying that it's evolution, a little bit evolution by revolution. So Ukrainian state creation, identity creation is a process for many years or decades now. So Orange Revolution was not a failure, it was not a win as well. I mean, it was a step in the process of becoming independent state, and also defining what your nation, what your society means, what are the values, what keeps you together, what does it mean to be Ukrainian. And I think Maidan was probably, hopefully, maybe one of the last steps in that process, although it was very radical. And for me, as a Pole, as a human being, and as a journalist, it was one of probably the most important experience in my life, and especially in Donbass. It's the generation, people that are fighting there are my generation, and I feel culturally very close to Ukraine. So somehow I perceive it as my experience from that point, that I could imagine something like that happening also to me. So what I'm trying to say, I really respect all the things that society has done here, but I can't define it as and give it like ending stamp, whether it's a failure or success. It's just a transformation.
Michał, I would also ask you, probably talk in the context also of the Ukrainian-Polish relations. There were clear the times when Ukraine, and Ukraine and Poland are close countries, and Ukraine always seen the Poland as its ally, but as well as somebody who is like moving Ukraine to Europe.
Is your impression that something has changed is due to the war? Because if you have a war, it's natural that you are looking for a strong ally, a real power, and the Germany, of course, are stronger than Poland, and Germany may offer you much more than our country. So it's in my opinion, it's natural that the Ukrainian policy has changed in some way, and Poland is not as important as it was before. But let me say that in my I remember the Maidan time, and I saw my friends collecting money for supporting Maidan. I remember my friends sending some military equipment to help people here, and I think this support is a constant figure in our society and in our policy. As far as I know, every Polish politician try to remind the European leaders, the president of USA of the war which is on the Europe border in Ukraine, and in my opinion there are some problems associated with history. The fact that this Wołyń massacre is a really difficult problem for us, and we have an impression that it is not seen by Ukrainian historians, elites. We have an impression that you don't want to discuss this issue anymore, anytime. It didn't exist, but it existed. So the problem, this is the main problem in my opinion, this problem from the past, which influences on our politics strongly.
So, Paul, you reported a lot of conflicts as well, and follow what's going on here in this part of Europe. Mm-hmm. Now, so as well, what's your perspective on the Maidan and what's happened after? Also, the country mentioned by the U.S. media a lot because of Russia.
As for the United States, policy towards Ukraine right now, I mean, it has all to do with Donald Trump's changing schizophrenic position on Russia in relationship to Putin. So it's really hard to really say much at all. I mean, I began my career as a journalist in 1989, following the collapse of communism. I lived in Budapest, traveled all throughout Central Europe, and that inspiring moment. And I still feel here today. Eventually, there were very high expectations everywhere in Central Europe and Eastern Germany at the time as well, and there were disappointments then, and I don't know. I still feel here a strength of civil society. I think that Ukraine has made incredible advances in its democracy. We've been talking about the anti-corruption laws and some of the institutions that have been set up, and the incredible work of NGOs on the ground. And I find it all really quite inspiring and impressive. And I hope and think it can go on. I think that there is a danger that in the West that Ukraine is being looked at or could be looked at as a hopeless case or a failed state. And what is clear to me from this visit is that is not the case, and that international efforts and international mediation have to continue. I noticed that, I don't think that they're as strong as what was happening in the early 90s in the Balkans, where you had the European Union and you had all kinds of different things, a real intense engagement. It seems that even recently some of the international interest has kind of petered out, and I'd like to see that come back again. I mean, I think that ultimately the solution to the situation in Donbass lies in Moscow. So it's absolutely critical that the sanctions be maintained, and I would even like to see them strengthened. I mean, I think it would be the right move on the side of the Germans to cancel the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, to put more pressure on Putin. That's where change is going to come. He has to be put under pressure to involve himself more honestly and sincerely in the peace process. I mean, ultimately what's going to happen is there's going to have to be a peacekeeping force like what happened in Bosnia and happened in Kosovo. I served on both peacekeeping missions. It's 2 years in Bosnia and I was 2 years in Kosovo working for the OSCE and then the UN. It did work. It was very important that there was a military structure and that there was a civilian structure, which I was part of, reforming the media in Bosnia. And it worked. It's very important that they get the mandate right at the very beginning. In Bosnia, we now have peace and there are elections and all kinds of work has been done on human rights, but it's basically a frozen, as a paralyzed peace. And that was because that the mandate itself, Dayton, was inadequate. So I wouldn't want to see that same mistake made in the Donbass.
And Natascha, so you also reported on the region, and besides that, your impression, what we would expect also from Germany.
I see the vividness, the activeness of the civil society, many activities on the ground, despite also many, hindernisses. This is the German word. Blockades, things that are happening, people who are active, people who are fighting corruption, who are dying. So there's a threat to life if you are active in Ukraine, which is not comparable to any situation, for instance, in Germany. What I have to say about German-Ukrainian relationships is that I'm a bit worried about a new neglectance of the Ukrainian issue I think both in German media, and that of course reflects German politics as well. I'm pretty sure the German politicians know what's going on in Ukraine, know what's going on in the Donbass. But if you look at the society and their awareness of the war, for instance, and of the needs of Ukraine, I'm a bit afraid that it kind of is out of the focus. Of course, with many other problems that happened, in the last 5 years with the migrants discussion, etc. But coming back to the European Union, to the European project as a project of peace, and knowing that in Europe, even though Ukraine is not part of the Union, but still I consider it as a European country, there is a war going on, is something that we shouldn't forget. And so we really, it's our duty not to leave Ukraine, it's with its problem alone. And I'm afraid that we have a situation where we look at Ukraine and the Donbass war actually as a frozen conflict in our awareness as well. And this is the wrong way. And I agree that we should be sensitive about sanctions against Russia to not to leave that track, for sure.
Last year we visited Moscow, and I think that our general impression was that Russia is weaker than we thought. And now my impression is that Ukraine is stronger than we thought. This is this general impression.
That's a summary which is probably would be nice to finish the discussion.